What is going on with the Bears offense? Today I want to talk about Shane Waldron and evaluate what having a good offensive coordinator means. I'm not here to argue who the best play caller is or anything, but when you think of the best play callers in the NFL, there's a clear list of names that stand out. Andy Reid in Kansas City, Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco, Sean McVay with the Rams, Matt LaFleur up north, Mike McDaniels in Miami, etc., etc. But try to make a list of the top play callers that are not head coaches. And it's hard to complete that list without having Shane Waldron in your top 5. There are 2 clear top dogs out there, Bobby Slowick with the Texans and Ben Johnson with the Lions. But after that, it's a mixed bag all around the NFL. Even Luke Getsy is calling plays in the NFL right now. So the biggest thing that happened was that the Bears decided to keep Matt Eberflus. Once they did that, their options were pretty limited. You also have to realize that you can't hire other teams' offensive coordinators unless they get fired. But Shane Waldron was a unique opportunity. The Seahawks head coach, Pete Carroll, had just retired, and the Seahawks chose to let all of their coordinators interview with other teams. So when it comes to offensive coordinator candidates and guys that could develop Caleb Williams and run this offense, we were keeping Matt Eberflus, so we couldn't hire a new head coach, and our options were very limited. When it comes to offensive coordinators that actually called plays in the NFL last season, there was really only one candidate that stood out. It was Shane Waldron, unless you wanted to hire someone that got fired like Luke Getsy. And then when you talk about guys that have actually called plays in the NFL recently, had success, and not been fired, that list also included only one candidate, Shane Waldron. And then when you consider the success that Shane had in Seattle with Geno Smith, and that he ran a similar offense that we wanted to run here in the West Coast Shanahan style system, but he also works with young quarterbacks at the Quarterback Collective, helping train quarterbacks all across the country, and he was already familiar with Caleb Williams. On top of that, no matter what the fans say, Waldron had a ton of success in Seattle, and he helped completely revive Geno Smith's career. Geno Smith was in the NFL for 7 years before he worked with Shane Waldron. He was a bust and an afterthought around the NFL, a guy who was going from team to team as a journeyman, and Shane Waldron in one season turned him into a legit starter and a guy who threw for more than 4,000 yards. In 7 years in the NFL without Shane Waldron, Geno Smith had a 12-19 record. He had a 57% completion percentage as a passer, and he had thrown more interceptions than touchdowns with a QB rating of 41.0. Nothing to get excited about. This is now his 4th season in Seattle. He spent 3 of those years with Shane Waldron, and during that time, he amassed a 21-17 record, threw for 9,428 yards, with a better than 2-to-1 TD to interception ratio, and he majorly improved his completion percentage as well, completing 68.1% of his passes with a QB rating of 97.0, completely turning his career around and earning a $100 million contract from the Seahawks. He owes Shane Waldron some thanks. He threw for over 4,000 yards in one season with Shane Waldron, after only throwing for 6,000 total yards in his previous 8 years in the NFL. That kind of turnaround has to be talked about more, and Shane Waldron at least deserves some credit for helping Geno Smith get that done. We haven't had a coordinator do anything like that in my entire lifetime. But another point here, offensive line really matters. No play caller in the NFL looks good without an offensive line, and pretty much anyone can call plays and look at least average if you have a really great offensive line. But we have to be realistic here. I think a lot of us did want Matt Eberflus fired after last season. But once that didn't happen, our options to develop Caleb Williams were limited. Think about it. Most of the NFL's top play callers are head coaches. I just mentioned that. Andy Reid, Matt LaFleur, etc., etc. And then when you talk about the top 3 options that are not head coaches, it's Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, and Todd Monken. None of those guys could have been hired as our offensive coordinator. You can't hire other teams' offensive coordinators unless you're promoting them to head coach. So with Matt Eberflus as our head coach, none of those guys are options. When you look around the NFL, the best play callers are mostly head coaches. Outside of Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick, who both turned down head coaching opportunities this year, the options for experienced play callers were severely limited. I mean, the Raiders hired Luke Getsy to run their offense. That's right, Luke Getsy got another job in the NFL calling plays, not even having to take a year off. That's crazy. But that means our best options for hiring an offensive coordinator this year to work underneath Matt Eberflus, besides Shane Waldron, were Clint Kubiak, who's now the Saints offensive coordinator, Thomas Brown, who we hired as a passing game coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, who's now the Commanders offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, who's the Rams OC, or Kerry Joseph, who we hired as our QB coach. So we hired two of our other options for OC to work underneath Shane Waldron. So considering that we were keeping Matt Eberflus, I find it pretty hard to believe that we could have landed a more proven offensive coordinator than Shane Waldron. We at least don't have a first-time guy doing it this time. When we hired Matt Nagy, he had never called plays in the NFL. When we hired Luke Getsy, he had never called plays in the NFL. Let's at least give Shane Waldron a chance here. He has had success in the NFL, and our offense did take some steps forward this week. It wasn't perfect, but you have to admit that our passing game took a step forward in the second half. And it's also important to remember that the biggest problems on this offense have came from our offensive line and our running game, which has been non-existent. Shane Waldron technically oversees both areas, but there is one man who's not only our offensive line coach, but also our run game coordinator, Chris Morgan. If anyone deserves to be under fire right now, it might be Simo, who was retained from the Luke Getsy era. Are Simo's run game schemes clashing with Shane Waldron's passing offense? That is definitely something to consider. Because when I watched tape from Seattle's run game last year in Seattle, it looked way better than what we have, and it can't just be the offensive line, but that does play a factor. But it comes down to this. We want to have one of the NFL's best play callers. So should we be rooting for Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron to be gone after this season? Even if Waldron is a top play caller, won't some other team just steal him away after we have success? Look, it's tough, and that's a hard question to answer. But I do love what Matt Eberflus has done for this locker room, and I do think Shane Waldron can be a top 10 play caller. But every team in the NFL is looking for a top play caller, except for those few that have top play callers. But even the big name play callers look awful if the offensive line doesn't block. So I wanted to talk for a minute about what most people consider the worst play call of the game. It's 4th and goal from the 1-yard line, and Waldron calls a speed option from the pistol. DeAndre Swift has nowhere to go and actually loses 12 yards on this play. But when watching the replay, it's hard to miss that 4 out of our 5 offensive linemen are on the ground within 1 second of the snap happening. That is just insane to me. Every offensive lineman except Matt Pryor is laying on the ground before DeAndre Swift even gets the ball. He had no chance on that one. What in the world are we doing? Tevin Jenkins whiffed. Braxton Jones whiffed. Coleman Shelton whiffed. Let me be clear. I'm not a big fan of the play call. Running a speed option play at the goal line is more of something I would expect to see in college football. But moving past that, the biggest issue with the play was still a lack of execution and mixed blocks by the offensive line. But hopefully Shane Waldron learned his lesson on that one, and I think moving forward he's going to give Caleb Williams more opportunities to pass, especially in the red zone. And it definitely seemed like that's the way it was trending in the second half. This team threw the ball a ton more. Now we were losing, but it did seem like Shane Waldron is starting to trust Caleb more and more. But the bottom line is still that our offensive line has to play better. And they did show flashes of doing that this week. They created some good pockets for Caleb Williams. And I did want to talk about one more example of what good offensive line and a good play caller can do for a quarterback. Look up north to the Packers. They traded just a 7th round pick to get Malik Willis, who at one point the Titans thought was their QB of the future. But Willis was awful during his time with the Titans, and most of the NFL had written him off. The Packers then acquired him for a 7th round pick, and after 2 games in Green Bay, Willis has looked like a completely different player. The Packers boast a really solid offensive line and one of the best play callers in the NFL. Suddenly, Malik Willis doesn't look so bad. In his 3 starts for the Titans, he had a QB rating of 39.0. In just 2 starts with the Packers, he has a QB rating of 131.7, while also running all over teams for 114 yards and a touchdown. I've been saying it for years and talking about the trenches, but offensive line play really matters. And until our offensive line gels and gets going, it's impossible to evaluate Shane Waldron as an offensive coordinator. But that hasn't stopped a large percentage of our fan base from asking for Waldron to be fired. Look, that's not happening. The Bears don't fire coordinators mid-season, barring something crazy happening, so Waldron has 14 more games to right the ship. The bottom line to me is that I think Shane Waldron deserves more time, and that it's actually impossible to evaluate him with how inconsistent our offensive line has performed. It took 3 games, but our offense finally looked like it was starting to click in the 4th quarter yesterday. We've been dreaming of an offense that can score consistently our entire lives, and our passing game took a huge step forward yesterday. My biggest worry right now is with the run game, but maybe more Roschon Johnson could help. I'm at least willing to give Waldron more time to see if he can right this ship. I don't judge anyone after 3 games. It's simply not enough of a sample size, and there are too many moving parts here. But the Bears are not going to fire Waldron, and he will be our offensive coordinator for the rest of the season. So I'm going to have a little bit of patience, but I will be evaluating him as fairly as I can every week. It's important to be realistic here and realize that Shane Waldron is not Andy Reid. He is not Matt LaFleur. But what is he? The best option we had to work underneath Matt Eberflus. So stay tuned if you want to see me evaluate him the rest of the season. I'll be digging into the film room to find out what really went wrong with our offense yesterday. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more Bears content. Thanks to everyone who watches. Stay tuned, and until next time, bear down.